this is a larger subject. I know I don't want to get too abstract with you, but it's an important piece of understanding the Qur'an. The Qur'an isn't just talking about spiritual reality. The Qur'an isn't just talking about legal reality, or it isn't just talking about psychological or emotional reality. The Qur'an is talking about multiple dimensions of reality. Depends on where you are in the Qur'an. And for example, one of the aspects of reality Allah talks about that's often not understood, Allah talks about the reality of human individuals, and He also talks about the reality of human societies. Like human beings have a cycle from childhood to adolescence to teenage years to adulthood to old age, and there's a cycle. And there are certain tendencies we have at each of those stages, certain common denominators. Allah will talk about that reality. Allah will talk about the common overwhelming desires human beings have. زُيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ وَالْبَنِينَ, etc. Right? That's at the individual level. But Allah also describes the life cycles of nations. What happens to a nation when it's at its top? What happens when it falls? There's formulae given in the Quran. And Allah is not just talking about some ancient nation that happened to. If you carefully study that, you can extract from it the formula. So the experiment is actually not the goal. The experiment is there to prove the formula. So what the Quran does is, if you contemplate, it's showing you the case study, but from the case study, you're supposed to extract the formula. And once you have the formula in your hand, now you can look at any other scenario and say, does this formula apply here? Does it apply here? Does it apply here? Right? So it's actually these sets of principles that allow you to see reality in a very different way. It gives you a set of tools that can be used over and over and over again once you have them. Right? So this is actually what Al-Haqq embodies. Once you understand reality a certain way, you have a tool, you have a way by which you can see through what is real and what is fake. How to recognize an enemy, how to recognize a friend, how to recognize a nation on the rise, how to recognize a nation on the fall, etc., etc. Right? So that's فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فَيَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّهِمْ. Just on the reality side of things. The other piece of that is purpose. Al-Haqq also means purpose. Allah never gives an example unless it has a purpose. And He gave it in the final revelation because it will continue to have purpose until we leave this earth. In other words, no example is ever going to be irrelevant to our condition. Like, even if it's an example of a mosquito and you're like, I don't live in a tropical country and we don't have a mosquito problem. We're not in Houston. We have a much lesser mosquito problem in Dallas. So it's not that big of a deal here or whatever. No. Or I'm in Antarctica or I live in Alaska and they freeze to death over there. So we don't have a mosquito problem. It's not relevant to me. You're missing the point. The point isn't the mosquito. The point is the formula behind it. And that's going to live and that will always have a purpose. That will always have an application. And the believer sees that and they know that. Now, but there's a deeper problem. Allah says about the believer, even if you give the example of a mosquito, فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فَيَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّهِمْ. Those who believe, they already know it is purposeful and real from their Rabb. So Allah is talking about something very meaningful, purposeful, and He's commenting on reality in some way. He's not commenting on some abstract philosophical thing, He's commenting on reality. How do you know that before even understanding it? Like when you hear about the mosquito, you don't even know what the purpose of that is, but you know it's purposeful. You know what the Western academic calls that? They call that a faith bias. You don't even know what it is yet, but you already know it's true. How can you know it's true until you analyzed it, critiqued it, evaluated it, and eventually came to the conclusion that it's true? But before all of that experimentation, you already know that it's true? How come? Allah is talking about this because we are in the Madani Qur'an. And the Madani Qur'an is sitting on the foundation of the Makki Qur'an. And the Meccan Qur'an established why should you believe? Why should you become a believer to begin with? Once you understand that, why should I accept these words as the words of God? Once that is set, on top of that come the examples. On top of that come the examples. If that isn't set, if that foundation isn't there, then your response will be, what am I going to learn from a mosquito? What do you get from the kuffar? فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَيَقُولُونَ مَاذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ بِهَذَا مَثَلًا. It's as if Allah is saying, Iman is almost a precondition to get what you need to get out of the examples. Iman has to already be there for you to learn from the examples. You have to believe in the value coming from this teacher, the ultimate teacher, Allah Himself, before you can benefit from the lesson. As simple as that. فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فَيَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّهِمْ. From a language perspective, there's the word amma here. And it occurs amma doesn't occur once, it always occurs twice. فَأَمَّا وَأَمَّا أَمَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. But there were easier ways to say this. You know, in Arabic we say, خَيْرُ الْكَلَامِ مَا قَلَّ وَدَلَّ. The best way to say something is to use the least amount of words. So you could say, يَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَنَّهُ الْحَقِّ. The believers know it's true. وَقَالَ يَقُولُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مَاذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ. And the disbelievers say, what does Allah intend? But أَمَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فَيَعْلَمُونَ. It's extended. And then وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَيَقُولُونَ. It's extended again. Why extend this? This is a rhetorical device to say these two groups of people are polar opposites. They're far apart from each other. There's no, you know, sometimes there's people that are Democrats, some people are Republicans, and some people are Democrats in some things and Republicans in other things. A little bit of a mix in between, right? Some people are conservative, some people are liberal. In some things they're not that conservative and the liberals not that liberal. That happens. But Allah is describing two groups of people that have no overlap. They are on extreme opposite ends. There's no in between when it comes to this. There's no compromise. There's no middle group when it comes to this. So Allah is actually drawing a very hard line between these two groups that approach the examples that Allah gives, the mindset that Allah gives. This is important to note because then for you and me, we better make sure we're on the right side of this camp because there's no in between. I'm kind of sorta in the middle. There's no sorta in the middle when it comes to this distinction. فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Okay. Then another important observation. And that is that when Allah talked about the believers, Allah said, يَعْلَمُونَ. They know. They know. But when He talked about the disbelievers, He didn't say they know. He said they say. يَقُولُونَ. Allah could have said, when believers hear the example, they say it's the truth. And when disbelievers hear it, they say, what does Allah mean? They say, they say. But for believers, they know, and for disbelievers, what? They say. Why? Knowing is internal, isn't it? Knowing is internal. Allah is not describing the external of the believer. Allah is describing the internal of the believer. The internal state is being highlighted. But for the disbeliever, it's as if Allah is saying that they didn't really go through an internal process. They didn't allow anything internal to actually activate before they opened their mouth. For them, it's an impulsive response. They just come out and what? Say. So it's the mouth moving that's been highlighted. يَقُولُونَ. What's also really interesting is that Allah didn't say فَيَسْأَلُونَ مَاذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ. What did the disbelievers say? They said, what does Allah intend by this as an example? But when you say, what does Allah intend? Isn't that a question? That's a question. The word for that should be يَسْأَلُونَ. They ask, what does Allah intend? Allah didn't say they ask, what does Allah intend? Allah says, they say, what does Allah intend? What in the word? Why would He say the word say and not say the word ask? What could we learn from that? You see, when somebody asks, they want to know the answer. When somebody says, they just want to make a comment. For example, you're about to leave the house and your mother looks at you and says, you're going to wear that? Are you really wearing that? She says that. Is she asking or saying? She's not asking. She's saying go change. Do you understand? When you say, even if it's a question, it's not really a question, it's sarcastic. And this is a common occurrence in the Qur'an. By the way, يَسْأَلُونَكَ in the Qur'an, يَسْأَلُونَكَ مَاذَا يُنْفِقُونَ. They ask, what should we spend? That's actually a question. قُلِ الْعَفُوَ قُلْ مَا أَنفَقْتُم مِّنْ خَيْرٍ. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْيَتَامَى. They ask you about the orphans. قُلْ إِصْلَاحٌ لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ. They tell them doing good among them is a good thing. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الشَّهْرِ الْحَرَامِ قِتَالٍ فِيهِ. They ask you about the sacred months. Can we fight in it? Those are genuine questions.